from Commissioner Edwards. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And Rainier. We'll see if Dennis comes on in a little while. Tenino.
Hey, Cutter Copeland, City of Tenino.
And I'm J.W. Foster from Yelm and your chair. Bucota. I don't see Alan on here. Chehalis Tribe. Is Amy with us today? I don't see that Amy. But I do see Nisqually Tribe is represented today.
Yes, Dave Isle, Nisqually Tribe, Tribal Council.
Morning, David.
Morning.
North Thurston Public Schools, we have a new face.
Good morning, I'm Gretchen Maliska, and I'm the current board president. Thanks for having me this morning.
Thanks for being here. We'll expect you to be able to sing the TRPC song by the next meeting.
Yeah, hard pass, but thanks anyway, JW.
I got to try. Tumwater School District.
Mel Murray, Director of Facilities.
Thank you. Olympia School District.
Hillary Seidel, member of Olympia School Board.
Frank Wilson, Executive Director of Operations.
Welcome, Frank. Olympia School District. I just said that. Intercity Transit. We're back to Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn Cox, Chair of Intercity Transit.
And Lot Clean Water Alliance.
Cynthia Pratt, and also the Vice Chair of TRPC.
Port of Olympia.
EJ Zeta, Port of Olympia.
And Public Utility District number 1. Well, it's rare to not have Chris here, so I would expect him to kind of jump in a little while, or Russ. And then our non-voting membership, Thurston Conservation District.
Good morning, Helen Wheatley.
Morning, Helen. Lacey Fire District 3.
Hello, Fire Commissioner from Lacey Fire District 3. Thank you.
And Rick, the big question this morning is, where is Lacey Fire Districts 1 and 2?
That's a good question, and I think you know the answer to that.
I do.
Thurston County Fire Protection District number 3, Lacey.
Very good. Thank you. Puget Sound Regional Council. I don't have my Cricket sound machine with me this morning. Evergreen State College.
Scott Morgan with Evergreen.
And where are you coming from this morning, Scott?
Stonehenge. Goldendale, kind of down on the gorge.
Very good. Thurston Economic Development Council.
Good morning. Michael Cade.
Morning. And Timberland Regional Library.
Good morning, Cheryl Haywood.
And Mark, if you'll introduce staff, please.
I will. So from Thurston County, we have Matt Unzelman and Becky Kahn. From Tumwater, we have Mary Heather Ames. From Intercity Transit, Jessica Gould and Eric Phillips. From Olympia, we have Joyce Phillips and Carrie Hornby. And from TRPC, we have myself, Mark Daly, the Executive Director, Bina Tabbitt, Berlina Lucas, Michael Ambrogi, Allison Osterberg, Karen Parkhurst, Amy Hatch-Winnica, Katrina Van Every, Paul Brewster, and Dave Reed. And I think, oh, there was one name, Frank Wilson. I don't recognize that name.
Frank's from Olympia School District. He already introduced.
Yep. Oh, yes, and we did that last time. I'm sorry, Frank. You were with us last time too. My apologies.
No, that's great. Go ahead, Scott.
JW, if I may, I point out that our Associate Vice President for Facilities, William Ward, is also joining us today.
Welcome, William. Very good. Did we miss anybody?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you missed Rainier. Dennis McVeigh.
No, we got you, Dennis. You were late.
Yeah, your little system didn't quite work right.
Well, I'm glad you're
Hello,
here.
everybody.
Always good to see you. Thanks for joining us. So we have a big screen full of Zoom participants today. A reminder that if you're not actually speaking, please mute your microphone so we don't hear the background noise. You're welcome to keep your video on, though. It's always fun to look around and see the smiling faces. So with that, could we approve the agenda, please?
Move to
Edwards,
approve.
so moved.
Second, Zeta.
Commissioner Edwards, motion to approve the agenda, seconded by Commissioner Zeta. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have our agenda. Consent calendar is next up, and it has the minutes from the previous meeting, the vouchers, the Unified Planning Work Program that is attached to your packet and you've had a chance to look at before, and the indirect cost proposal. We need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve, Zeta.
Second, Cynthia.
Seconded by Cynthia Pratt. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. This brings us to the public comment period. We didn't have anybody signed up for public comment. We didn't receive any written public comment, and we don't have any attendees at this point. So I don't believe we have any public comment. So we will move on to the other business before us, which is the state contract for WIRA 13 Deschutes Salmon Recovery Lead Entity Program. Mark, I think, is going to lead us through this review.
Yeah, this is a pretty quick item. So hopefully folks remember that, gosh, now it's been about 3 years now, that 2 or 3 years, we have hosted the Deschutes Watershed Salmon Recovery Lead Entity here at TRPC. And the funding that we get to help support that comes from Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. And believe it or not, they had some entities that were hosting lead entities that weren't entirely in the know of the contract and the work that was going on. And so RCO started a process where they want the decision-making body for the host of the lead entity each biennium to basically acknowledge that, yes, give me the authority to enter into an agreement with RCO for that lead entity coordination contract. We did this last year. Last year was the first time that they started this. From this point forward, we will simply do it on a biennial basis. So right now we are working with RCO on an agreement for the next 2 years to host the lead entity. And they are looking to have our council basically approve that we enter into an agreement with RCO to host the lead entity. This is just a first review. It'll be on your consent calendar next month, but this is truly an administrative issue to make sure you all are aware that we're going to enter into an agreement to continue hosting the Deschutes Watershed Salmon Recovery Lead Entity. Any questions on that? I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Commissioner Zeta. Okay, so it'll be on your consent calendar for next month. Thank you all.
So, Mark, I mean, this is petty, but in the packet, it demonstrated, it asked that the requested action was to approve the UPWP. So this is just our first review, and we won't be actually.
If it says to approve the UPWP, that is a mistake on my part, because what we are looking to approve is basically giving me the authority to enter into an agreement with RCO.
Well, we'll see. This is part of the consent agenda next month rather than taking action.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Then we will move on to, I didn't see any questions, so we'll move on to number 7, Trails Survey Results. Paul Brewster.
Good morning. Just give me a moment while I pull up my presentation here.
We can see it.
Great, and I'm going to launch into it and do another adjustment. Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to give you an overview of the Thurston Regional Trails Planning Survey. But before I do that,
Paul, sorry to interrupt, but we're seeing your preview screen, not your presentation screen.
Let me.
Thank you.
Are you seeing the slide deck now?
Yep.
Great. So before I dive into the Regional Trails Planning Survey results, I just want to take a moment to recognize that May is National Bike Month, and here in Thurston County, we celebrate that with the Thurston County Bicycle Commuter Challenge. But I think it's also important that the council reflect and celebrate its past accomplishments and its contributions to active transportation. TRPC, I think without an argument, we could say that one of the council's greatest accomplishments is the completion of the Chehalis Western Trail Bridging the Gap project. TRPC has also made significant investments in the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail. And most recently, the Deschutes Valley Trail in Tumwater, connecting from Brewery Park to Tumwater Historic Park. And if you're looking for something to celebrate Bike Month and Mother's Day this weekend, I would encourage you all to check that trail out. It's a really beautiful trail and a really beautiful park. But TRPC has also completed numerous trail studies, including phase 4 of the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail corridor, the Yelm Tenino Trail Extension Feasibility Study, which I should add now, I believe that the Thurston County Commissioners have recently renamed that trail the Yelm Rainier Tenino Trail to recognize Rainier as smack dab in the middle of that corridor. And TRPC is working in partnership with Thurston County on just launching a Grand Mound Rochester Trail feasibility study. In addition to these trails, TRPC has invested significant federal flex funds and road projects that include both sidewalks and bike lanes. And I'd be remiss to say, if I didn't say that TRPC's most popular publication to the community is the Thurston County Bicycle Map, where we print about 20,000 plus copies every 3 years, and just nearly all of those maps are taken up by the community. So I'm going to launch into this Regional Trails Planning Survey results now. If you think of an active transportation network, shared use trails, and what I mean by a shared use path, these are the paved bicycle and pedestrian trails. They're called shared use trails or multi-use paths. They're really the arterials of our active transportation network. And looking at this map, the solid green lines are the trails that are open to the public. Right now, we have about 56 miles of shared use paths that are paved and open to the community, but many more miles that have either been evaluated or studied or proposed. And as you can see from this map, these trails traverse multiple jurisdictional boundaries. And so much like a road network, the development and maintenance and operations of this corridor does require interjurisdictional coordination. And that's where the Regional Trails Plan comes in. It's really an opportunity to take a snapshot and look 20, 30, 40 years out into the future as to how we want to expand our trail network and how it's going to serve our community. Something else I just want to highlight too, we talk about trails here at TRPC in the context of bicycle commuting and active transportation, but these are also parks. These are open space corridors that people will use for a variety of reasons, and you'll see that reflected in the results of the survey. So just some basics on what the survey covered. The survey was open February 1st to March 12th, 2021. We had a little over 1,200 people, 1,201 exactly, participate. It was all an online survey. This is not a statistically significant or representative survey of the community, but trails are really popular, and we did have signs out on the trails. So The people that did respond to the survey clearly are people who are comfortable with or have experienced or used trails frequently. There were 14 questions. We wanted to ascertain how people use trails, what is their level of convenience with accessing trails, trying to get a sense of people's safety and security when they're using the trail, and then wanted to learn from them what their planning priorities are, their values, and how that can be a guiding principle for informing the regional trails plan, and then wanting to know how they'd like to be involved in the regional trails planning process. So this really is the first of its kind in a countywide trail planning survey. The county and the cities have collected data about trails through their park surveys, but these surveys often cover a variety of recreational facilities to serve their parks plans. This one focused exclusively on shared use trails. So before I jump into the results, I just want to point out the importance of collecting data and use on the trail. We do have one permanent counter that's been installed since 2018. It's probably hard to tell from the photo on that slide, but in the upper left corner of that image is the bridge over Pacific Avenue that borders Lacey and Olympia. So this is a trail counter that is just west of the roundabout on the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail. This counter is able to detect cyclists through a loop detector in the pavement, as well as an infrared beam that can pick up warm bodies. So this counter is able to differentiate cyclists from pedestrians. So as I'm presenting the data on the next slide, just keep in mind, this is just one little section of the trail, but I just want to give you a sense of what the use is. So at this counter, the peak use so far for 2021 was March 3rd with 670 users. The slide, this figure that you're looking at now is average daily counts by month from 2018 to 2021. You'll see in 2018, in orange, the battery died. So that is the one downside with automatic counters and technology is you gotta keep up on these to make sure they're accurately collecting data and working properly. But the other two lines I'd like you to focus on is the line in white. That was last year, 2020. In January, it kind of started out as a slow year in terms of the number of trail users visiting this particular segment. But as it progressed into March and April, we started hitting record numbers on the trail. And this was shortly after Governor Inslee's stay-at-home order, and the weather was getting nice, and trail use just skyrocketed. So we peaked at an average of 468 visitors a day at this location in April. Compared to this year, it was around 320. But if you look at this year, starting off in January, we started strong and going through the months of February and March during the survey period, trail use was very typical. So that's just kind of important to point out because we posted about 75 signs on the trail to advertise the survey that people could just use a QR code to pull up the survey and participate. So who did respond to this survey? 91% are non-Hispanic white people. People of color were underrepresented in responses. Thurston County as a whole, about 25% of the population identifies as a person of color. So also predominantly women, 64%, and predominantly middle-aged. So predominantly white, non-Hispanic, older, or I should say middle-aged women participated in the survey. That was our primary demographic group, and also highly educated. 90% had some form of college degree. 70% live in a city or town. That includes both our South County communities, and 94% of respondents are Thurston County residents, with a 6% share of people who responded from outside of the Thurston County, as far away as Lewis County, Pierce, King County, and Mason County participated in our survey. 5% reported they had a disability, and the majority of the households earned $75,000 or more per year. So one of the questions, we wanted to get a sense of what people's values are about trails. And we have a little word cloud that kind of summarizes the 934 comments that we received. But I just want to read you a few quotes from what some people said about what they value about trails. Someone said, as a regular bike commuter, I use the Chehalis Western Trail between Yelm Highway and Martin Way. This trail is a few minutes away from my home and drops me off right at work. Because of this, I can bike 3+ days a week consistently year round. It is something I do not take for granted. Someone said, I love that I can ride my horse on some of the trails. And one more person said, during the stay-at-home order, I was super grateful for the trail system, as my spouse and I used it daily to walk our dogs and get out of the house. So trails really do rise to the top of people's minds when it comes to how they recreate and use active transportation in their community. I just want to point out that not just in this trails plan, but in responding to the 2020 Thurston County Parks Open Space and Trails Plan, 78% of respondents selected paved walking trails and biking trails as their most frequently used type of recreational facility. And county respondents also indicated that the county needs more non-motorized trails. Results of the City of Olympia's 2021 Recreation Needs Assessment ranked paved shared use trails as the second highest priority out of 27 types of park facilities. That was just followed closely behind the number one, which was hiking trails. So it's really evident people really value trails in their community. So we wanted to learn what are the primary reasons that people now use or plan to use their trails. This is what is the trip purpose? What is the purpose of using trails? 97% both reported exercise and outdoor recreation. It's also valued for active transportation for commuting to work, going to school, or running errands. 20% of respondents said they use that. In comparatively with our 2019 commute trip reduction survey data, only about 2.5% of affected employees at commute trip reduction work sites report that they bike to work. And if you look at like sort of a time of day on our trails, it's sort of like a bell curve across the time of day. You do have use on the mornings and later in the evenings, but the real peak use is during the middle of the day. So just about any stretch of trail that you're on, especially like the Chambers Lake Trailhead near Panorama City, midday, you'll see a lot of users out on the trail. So I think these results are kind of reflective that people are really getting out there and using these trails for outdoor recreation, fitness, and socialization. We wanted to know how people are getting to trails. I think what was interesting is half of users, half the respondents reported that they drive to a trail. So they need a place to park. In South Thurston County, that was 54%. In North County, it was 49%. North County residents are more likely, that is 22%, to bike to a trail than South County residents, which is about 10%. But people are predominantly getting to trails by their car. We wanted to know how people generally use or plan to use trails. People like to walk, people like to ride a bike. Only 5% of respondents report using an electronic device on the trail. But that's interesting. I do see a lot of people using e-bikes on the trail, and I think over time we're going to see that grow. But just an observation, our shared use path rules really don't have any particular information or statement on a position about the use of e-bikes and e-scooters and things on our trail. And I did receive an email from a community member who expressed some reservation about wanting to report that on the survey because they weren't sure if electronic devices were even permitted. But beyond that, people use it for all variety of purposes: skating, horseback riding. We wanted to know what trail conditions people are experiencing that might affect their safety on the trail. These are really speaking more to hazards or just how people are interacting on the trail that might be safe, that could lead to some type of incident or conflict. Half of users, or excuse me, 1 out of 4 users said they didn't have any concerns, but the top 3 concerns people said: other users not following rules or using trails in an unsafe manner, irregularities in trail surfaces, and surface debris. So by not following rules or using trails in an unsafe manner, the comments that people provided to share their experiences has to do just with users' experiences and expectations on the trail and user conflicts. And what I mean by that is people who are walking with their backs can't see a bicyclist coming up behind them, and a bicyclist rides by real close, real quiet, doesn't announce that they're passing, and that really frightens people. On the other hand, a cyclist might be trying to get in a workout or a fitness ride and sees that someone is walking their dog and the leash is extended across the trail and is blocking their path. Or it could be just that families are out with their young children enjoying a day and they're socializing and talking, and that creates an interference between the cyclists and the people who are walking on the trail. So those are the sort of some of the feedback that we were getting. In terms of irregularities and surfaces, that has to do with tree root intrusion or debris, which would be really seasonal debris with winter storms where we do get branches and leaves and things like that that fall down on the trail. Trails can, some sections of our trail can go for a mile or more where there's no trail access points or entrances. You might not see anyone. So at times, a trail, even though it's wide out in the open, can feel very tunnel-like and can feel very enclosing. And for some, that can be an intimidating experience. So we wanted to know what people's sense of personal safety and security is. So we asked them how confident they feel using the trail, and they rated that sort of as fearless, confident, somewhat concerned, or sort of like no way. Males feel 9 times more fearless and twice as confident as females to use a trail alone. 1 in 5 females, that's around 20%, say they will not use a trail alone. But when asked if using the trails with other people, people's sense of safety and security really goes up. So using the buddy system, I think really overall gives people a greater sense of confidence to use our shared use trails. We also wanted to find out what would make people feel safer using the trails. The top 3 responses, regardless of where people live, their household income, their gender or race and ethnicity, reported that some type of patrols, whether it's like a voluntary patrol or a law enforcement patrol, to have some eyes and ears regularly patrolling the trail was number 1, followed sort of by cleanup of areas that are heavily used and impacted, and the repair removal of vandalized facilities. When asking what types of trail investments we should plan, the region should plan for, we looked at the weighted results where high was scored a 3, a medium a 2, and low a 1. The top 4 priorities, again, just like on the previous slide, regardless of people's demographics, the top priorities are maintaining existing infrastructure, expanding trails within Thurston region, enhancing trail-related infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, and improving neighborhood access to trails were the top 4. Asking how people rate the importance of those trail-related infrastructure types. The top 4, again, based on a weighted average and regardless of demographics, the top 4 were safer road crossings, trailheads with vehicle parking, signs and maps to aid navigation, and toilets and restrooms. So when it then comes down to respondents' trail planning priorities, a good state of repair enhances positive and safe experiences. So respondents rank maintenance of the existing system, so items such as repairing trail surfaces, managing vegetation, and servicing damaged facilities as their highest priority. And trails are recognized as a community asset that contributes to people's quality of life. And people value trails to meet a variety of outdoor recreation, wellness, and active transportation needs. So trail users believe planning investments should focus on expanding trails to serve Thurston County communities before connecting to neighboring counties. Walking, bicycling, scootering, and equestrian uses are all popular, and all of these users have some form of vulnerability when crossing a road. Respondents rated safe road crossings as a planning priority. And it goes without saying that safety is a shared responsibility. So more education on how to cross roads safely is also warranted. Over half of trail users reach a trail by driving a car, and during peak use, parking demand can exceed availability at many of the existing trailheads. Parking shortages are not only frustrating for the visitors trying to find that parking space, but as overflow occurs on streets, in neighborhoods, or on roadways, it can create unsafe trail conditions. So the trail system needs to plan for parking to accommodate current and future needs. Trail users want improved access to trails, maps, online resources, and other information to help people plan visits. Knowing where to park, learning what's available to explore, and having the tools to navigate the trail system are all key. So the survey results confirm that people like to be oriented to their surroundings. Signs and maps not only give people a sense of direction, it affords them certainty. And respondents also want neighborhood pathways, sidewalks, and transit stops to provide more direct access to trails. And lastly, long walks and bike rides make people tired and thirsty. And it goes without saying that increased physical activity increases metabolic activity, and trail users need to take a break. Rest areas and toilets are popular by necessity. We did hear through the comments some other concerns. Some of the more interesting information on the survey results came from what people put in just the open comment boxes. There is a general concern, probably more focused in the North Urban County, concerns about homeless encampments near trails. I have had conversations with the communities about this. There are very active attempts to mitigate this by having park stewards and others go out and address encampments that are within the trail rights of way. There's just, as you saw on the slide about how women feel their level of safety, there are sort of general safety concerns about how trails are used, just overall condition, lighting, people just having perceptions and feeling fearful at times. Of course, user conflicts and lack of etiquette are always going to be a concern. So it's just always important to be vigilant and remembering that these facilities are family-friendly facilities, that people need to be cognizant of other users and what they expect with their experiences, and adjusting your behavior on the trail to make sure that it's enjoyable for everyone. And so maybe more published information or things about that could address that. There has been quite a bit of feedback on excess garbage and some unsanitary conditions. By unsanitary conditions, I'm talking about both human waste and pet waste, and concerns about alcohol and drug use, and also mental health issues that people are seeing exhibited on the trail, and just general trail conditions. But despite these comments, there was also several comments that really praised the efforts of the trail managing agencies and the great job that they do maintaining the trail and making them accessible. So a lot of really expressions of support for how our trail system is managed and taken care of. In terms of how people wanted to be involved in the planning process, one of the gold harvested from the survey is 540 individuals provided their email address for future contact, and people expressed that they like to be involved. Over half of respondents want to take surveys. Nearly half want to stay in touch with email. About 30% staying in touch with social media, and lesser amounts that expressed a willingness to be engaged and participate in online meetings or virtual stakeholder meetings. But from this data, knowing how people use trails and what their email address, this will really help us reach out to stakeholders that, whether they're cyclists or equestrian users or skaters, we can start to get feedback from them directly on some of these areas to help inform some recommendations and courses of actions in the plan. So that's overall the results. These results will be used and shared by a Trails advisory work group that will help inform the direction for the plan. But I'm going to pause here to give you a chance to ask me questions or have any discussion on this.
Can you see everybody, Paul?
I can. I see, I'm gonna stop sharing for now so I can just see. I saw that Zita and then Cynthia.
Thanks for that summary, Paul. Your graphics in your presentation were a really nice supplement to the reading that you provided in the packet. Two comments, questions. One, if the battery's going out on the trail counters is a concern, maybe solar power is an option. I'm sure you've considered that and whether it's cost effective or not. And the second thing is, you mentioned in the packet that translation services were offered for the survey, but nobody requested them. And we got mostly white folks responding. I wonder if it makes sense to offer surveys in Spanish as well in the future.
Yeah, Zita, I think that does make sense. And we'll be looking at our public engagement strategy on this to make sure that we do try to reach those segments of the community that are typically underserved and planning processes and explore those opportunities. Okay, Cynthia.
So, well, great presentation, and what I like about it is that so much. I've had a lot of discussion about how trails aren't used in Lacey, and so I'm really pleased to see the data showing that and how important that bathrooms and stops are, because that kind of helps let people know that once you see the data, it actually justifies all that. I too was going to suggest that different languages might help for reaching out to other groups of people, and especially in the areas where like Lacey is very diverse. We don't often engage people though that need to respond, so that would be important.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think TRPC in general staff, we always need to find who those champions are in the community that have good relationships and connections with those members of our community to help us do outreach with our planning processes. I'm looking at all the heads on my screen. Are there any other questions or feedback? Carolyn, I see your hand up, and then Hillary.
This is more of just of a curiosity question. How do we signal which trails are available for equestrian use and which are not? In the bit of walking I've done out there, I've just never seen a sign that would indicate one way or another. And I've never encountered a horse.
Yeah, so in unincorporated Thurston County on the Chehalis Western Trail, north of South Bay Road and south of Fir Tree Road, equestrian use is permitted, and there are bridle trails. I have seen horseback users on these facilities. The equestrian horses don't like to walk on paved surfaces, as I understand. It's almost like ice for them. But it is popular, and we did receive that feedback. And I think the survey respondents' request for more information about trail use and accessibility, because it goes hand in hand, not just to know where you can ride on the trail, but where is there parking to park a horse trailer that has hitching posts and other facilities that serve equestrian uses would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, Hillary, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I'll echo everyone else's sentiments that I appreciated the detail and the thoroughness. So thank you very much for great supplemental materials and great presentation, Paul. I appreciate the care and attention you took to digging into where those demographics about the respondents don't match our community. And the one thing that I would like to put out there for the council to consider is that we know that best practices tell us that when we collect our data exclusively through online surveys, this is the result that we get. So it is great to make sure that we are actively offering other languages, but if we continue to offer this as the only way to engage with the survey or with the trail system feedback loop, then this will be the result that we get. And so in sort of connecting with our recent conversation around our equity policy, I would encourage the council to think about how we can devote more time and resources to other kinds of engagement, such as focus groups and working with community partners to facilitate those focus groups, rather than sending out a survey to the community partners to promote to their stakeholders, but really letting them design and lead some of that engagement. If our desire is authentic, which I think it is, to make sure that diverse voices get to give input into the trail system, then I think as a council, it's on us to also make sure that we are thinking and planning around how to support staff with the extra resources and time that they need to do that kind of really authentic community engagement. But overall, thank you, Paul. Great presentation.
Thanks for the feedback, Hillary. Malcolm, and then Dennis.
Just to dovetail on what Hillary was saying, is it possible that we could put, since the survey currently is online, is that correct?
The results should be published shortly. Our webmaster is working on that.
I mean, I guess the way they access the survey is.
Yeah, the survey closed, so no one can take the survey right now. There will be other opportunities later in the planning process when we get to recommendations and talking about alignments for people to weigh in on that again.
Okay, so do you think it's possible that we could put a QR code sign out, and then that way they could use, because most people walk trails with some type of a device, mostly a phone, and oftentimes those devices are translated into their language, their primary language that they use, and if there was a QR code that led them to the survey, it would translate into their primary language so that they could actually use this survey and do the survey. I know that there's always a cost involved with those types of things, but it could be an option that could help, diversify the survey a little bit.
Yeah, I like that idea, Malcolm. We had signs out on the trail. We had like 75 signs with the QR code, but we didn't think to say as right up front in that survey, I already have that online survey translated where one could choose the option of their language. So I think that's something we could look into doing on the next round.
Thank you.
I think I saw Dennis and then Cheryl. Maybe Dennis's phone is ringing.
Yes. I wanted to comment about the damn spam phone won't stop here. Okay. Comment about the visibility and safety and lighting. Even though the Yelm Tenino Rainier Trail is county owned and primarily maintained, the city of Rainier has partnered with them. And one of the things that we did to improve that is we removed brush and trimmed the trees up to about 10 feet. So you can see through, from State Route 507 or from other streets. And the feedback we've gotten back from the ladies primarily is they feel safer because they have visibility and there's no creepers hiding behind a bush or a tree somewhere. Relatively inexpensive, worked well. I think maybe some other cities might step up and do the same thing.
Thanks, Dennis. Cheryl, you had your hand up.
I did, thank you. Great presentation, Paul. I wanted to let you know that yesterday, there's what's called the One-Stop Committee for WorkSource, overseen by Pack Mountain, and we discussed the same thing that Malcolm just brought up about a QR code, and the Workforce Development Council, I believe in Benton, Franklin County, did it and was very, very successful in doing the QR code. And they recognize that QR code with a phone number and in multiple languages was very successful. And then I'm putting out there that if you want the library to help in any way, we can talk about this offline as well.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'll follow up with you. I think I saw JW. Was there someone else?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I didn't see on the survey where we were asking people if there was any other reason that they would be using the trail. What I'm getting at, when I would interview people at the trailhead over by the old Yelm City Hall, virtually every day, I had a car parked there with bike racks, and they told me they were coming from outside Thurston County just to ride our trail system and then take advantage of the restaurants and things like that in Yelm, which of course made me very happy. But it would be nice to know what we could do to increase the amount of the number of people coming from outside the county to take advantage of this trail system, and so provide a little boost to our economies locally.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on that a little bit. I think that's a great subject. I think Thurston County really does have an asset that can draw visitors from outside the region. The Yelm Tenino Trail, the Chehalis Western Trail are among those. I know that Experience Olympia and Beyond has done quite a bit of work to promote those trails and talk about what experiences and restaurants and things are along those corridors. So that's very helpful. There is a movement called Trail Towns USA, which is really an effort for communities to basically say the cash registers aren't on the trails. So what can communities do to draw people from the trails into their businesses and be supportive of trail users and cyclists and recognize that that is part of their culture and source of revenue for their community. So I think economic development, promotion, something that TRPC's done. We've in the past have sent copies of our Thurston County bike map up through Washington Bikes and the Cascade Bike Club at the Seattle Bike Expo, so that people from outside the county are getting their hands on copies of our map and see what opportunities there are for riding down here in our community. But also part of the challenge is the public sector really isn't in the business of promoting what private businesses are on the trail. The public sector is often focused on here are the restrooms and here's the retail center, but I think there's plenty of room for chambers of commerce and organizations like Experience Olympia and Beyond to help fill that role for our community.
Thanks, Paul.
Was there someone else? Is that everybody?
Corey's hand is up.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul. I just had a clarifying question about what you just said, that the public sector isn't in the business of doing that sign work. Is that because it's just not part of their tradition on the trails? Because we do it on highways, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if we have a DOT rep here. That's true. When you get off I-5, it often says what the food and what's there. I don't know if that's like a paid advertisement that's being done on those signboards. Does someone have an answer to that?
Yes, they do pay to have their logos on those signs.
But the signs, who installs the signs? That's what I mean, is like, it's like public entities might be able to provide the infrastructure, and then the businesses could pay for access. I don't know. I'm sort of looking at Michael Cade here to see if he knows about this, but sorry to put you on the spot, Michael.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think, Mark, do you know, I think it's the DOT that provides a sign and the businesses provide the fee to place their logo on it. So
that is correct.
Yeah, okay.
And I've had conversations with Experience Olympia and Beyond where we've talked about, like, if you think about downtown Rainier, there's restaurants and a park and services right there. So to have a kiosk that the city could invite business owners to provide the specifications for the size of the posting. But that would, I think trail users really come into a community looking to know, hey, what is here to see, do, and explore while I'm visiting.
Yeah, just anecdotal, JW, if you don't mind, just an anecdotal story. I know in the early days of the South Thurston Economic Development Initiative, the TRPC staff and our team went out and kind of a la Burma Shave signs during the STP race. And I think the Yelm Chamber of Commerce also put out a number of those Burma shave signs, like every, 10 yards and put a sign up. And it was crazily successful in generating some interest by the folks on STP to stop for water and other sundries. So, you're on to Hillary. That's a pretty good idea and probably something ought to be talked about at the Experience Olympia and Beyond. And I'll make sure I put it on our agenda to make sure I talk to Experience Olympia and Beyond about that as well. Because I think it's a great opportunity for the local chambers of commerce to get involved. So,
yeah, to tag along onto that as well as we had an application, we put in an application ourselves actually as a city to our lodging tax dollars to put wayfaring signs up. The committee denied our request to put them up on the freeway, but did pay for the ones in town. And we're going to revisit that again. And we would then, as a city, use those monies to put wayfaring signs up on the I-5 to direct people to Yelm and our trail system, et cetera.
Great.
Dennis?
Well, there we go. I just wanted to comment about signage to direct people to businesses. In Rainier, as Paul mentioned, we haven't put up signs, but what we did opt to do was group picnic tables and benches and trash containers near the businesses that provide food or refreshment. And especially on weekends, they're absolutely packed. People come in, and a lot of them come in from out of county, like JW is talking about, and they either start by eating and going biking, or they go biking and they come back and eat before they go home. But the picnic tables and the benches highlight that there is something there for you other than just exercise. And it's working for us. I don't know if it would work for anybody else.
Apparently, they just didn't take the survey.
Debbie,
That's probably true.
Hi, Debbie.
Hello. So I like it when people watch you live and then they can tell you what you need to say. So, but apparently somebody who sits on VCB, Visitor Convention Bureau, said that they had done a video advertising the trail, and it's featuring a family down by Rainier. So I think that's also an area that there might be advertising happening, or those types of things that we just may not be aware of from different organizations.
But overall, our trails are great. We really appreciate the work TRPC staff did in compiling the results from the survey. And Paul, your presentation was outstanding. I think we could have more questions about this later, but we're going to move along, if that's okay. Unless Mark Daly has something.
No, before you send everyone on break, I wanted a point of clarification on your earlier question about the salmon recovery lead entity. I just wanted to make sure to clear it up for the record. I think you were looking at today's consent calendar, and the Unified Planning Work Program is on today's consent calendar. The salmon recovery lead entity will be on next month's consent calendar. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. All right, folks, we're going to, by our agenda, we would take a break at 9:30 just to go do the coffee balance act. So we'll still keep it at 5 minutes rather than come back at 9:40. Let's start now at 9:25 and come back at 9:30. See you in a few. Feel free to stay and chat amongst yourselves.
Hey, Dennis, can you hear me?
I can.
Do you know how to mute your microphone?
Yeah, I think I just tap on it and
Yeah.
up in the upper right corner, it says mute.
We
Why
try
is there?
and, yeah, we try and mute our microphones unless we're speaking. So then the background noise doesn't get in the way of the speakers. Does that work for you?
Oh yeah, that's what I have. Am I creating background noise?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So if you just mute it until you're ready to speak, that'll be good for everybody.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to do that too.
Okay, people should be filtering back in. There we are. We're all in our places with our bright planning faces. So let's keep the momentum going. And Allison and Michael will talk to us about buildable lands.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. So my name is Michael Ambrogi, and I'm here with Allison Osterberg this morning to provide you all with an update on the work that TRPC has been doing on the 2021 Buildable Lands Report. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, see if I can get this to work. How does that look for everyone?
You're good, Michael.
Right, go ahead and get started then. So the Buildable Lands Program, just as a reminder, is a requirement under Washington State's Growth Management Act, and it's a requirement of the 7 fastest growing in Western Washington. And the intention of the Buildable Lands Program is to evaluate growth trends that have happened in these fastest growing counties, and to make sure that the development that's occurred, as well as the housing that's projected, the growth that's projected over the next 20 years, is consistent with the 13 goals that GMA laid out. The Buildable Lands Report is kind of a summary of those findings, and it's due 3 years prior to the periodic comprehensive plan updates. So in 2025, the comprehensive plan updates will be due, and the Buildable Lands Report, when it's completed, will help inform that update. Again, the intention of Buildable Lands is to identify if we're online to meet GMA's land use goals. If the finding is that we are in line with those goals, then we don't need to take any action. However, if we find that we're not meeting those land use goals, then we're required to identify reasonable measures. And those would be kind of corrective actions that the cities and county are required to adopt in those comp plan updates to kind of bring our growth trends more into alignment with GMA's goals. So Allison and I first presented on the Buildable Lands update back in February. And if you recall from that time, that the 2021 Buildable Lands Report for Thurston County is divided into 2 sections. So volume 1 focuses on those GMA specific goals. And the GMA statutes around buildable lands are pretty prescriptive as to what metrics we're required to look at to identify whether or not we're meeting those goals. So we look at achieved densities. So those are the housing densities that we've seen built over the past kind of 10 to 20 years. We want to make sure that we're seeing urban densities within our urban areas. And we want to make sure that the densities in our rural areas are consistent with rural character and rural development. We're also required to look at capacity. We want to make sure that there's enough developable land and there's enough capacity for new housing to accommodate 20 years of housing, commercial, and industrial growth. And then finally, rural areas. So we do an evaluation of densities for rural areas, again, to make sure that they're consistent with rural character. And if you recall, when we presented on the findings for volume 1, Thurston County is doing pretty well in all of those areas. So the densities that we're seeing are urban in nature and they're increasing over time. There is enough buildable land to accommodate 20 years of growth, and the densities that we're seeing for new development in the rural areas are consistent with rural character. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about volume 2 of the report. In volume 2, I identify some of our regional goals, which are a little bit more aggressive than the goals that GMA has set out. And namely, these are the goals that were identified under the Sustainable Thurston planning process. So Sustainable Thurston was a countywide community outreach effort that completed in 2013, and it identified some land use targets to evaluate whether or not we're on track to meet those Sustainable Thurston goals. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So like I said, Sustainable Thurston was a community-wide planning effort completed in 2013, and it really asked the community how they wanted Thurston County to look, function, and feel in 2035. And it outlined a land use vision that was associated with that plan. And that vision kind of fell into 4 different land use areas. So within our North County urban centers and corridors, these would be our downtown areas and the neighborhoods along our frequent transit corridors. The vision was for dense neighborhoods where people could live, work, and play without depending on a vehicle. You know, they would be close to the amenities that they wanted to visit on a daily basis. For South County communities, the focus was on economic development and entrepreneurship. We really wanted to maintain that small town feel, but provide some new opportunities for business development there. Within our neighborhoods, those residential neighborhoods outside of the downtowns and urban corridors, the vision was for areas with a range of housing options centered around either neighborhood centers or civic spaces. Again, people would live in those areas and still have access to a business that they might walk to, a small corner grocery store or something that they might go to on a daily basis without needing to get in their car. And finally, for rural lands, the vision was to preserve rural character, protect critical habitat, and protect resource lands such as agricultural or forestry. And one of the great things about Sustainable Thurston is that it didn't just identify these goals, but it also identified some targets, some specific targets to kind of hold us accountable to make sure that we're actually developing in a way that's consistent with those, with that vision. So the first Sustainable Thurston target that we'll talk about is this target that 95% of new housing built between 2010 and 2035 would be in the urban areas. And the intention of this target was really to focus on, again, getting more housing in our urban areas to promote those urban densities, but also to take some of the pressure off of our rural areas to help preserve natural resource lands, farmland, and preserve the character of our rural areas. The Buildable Lands Report finds that between 2010 and now, about 86% of new housing has been within our urban areas. And we can use the information in TRPC's population and employment forecast, which tells us that between now and 2035, we can expect about 87% of housing to be within our urban areas. So that's well below the target that we set for ourselves of 95%. The second target was that by 2035, 72% of all households, specifically within our urban areas, will live within a half mile of an urban center, an urban corridor, or a neighborhood center where they have access to goods and services to meet some of their daily needs. And the goal of this target was that we want to make sure that the people who live within our urban areas actually have access to those urban amenities, that they are within walking distance of shops, work, places where kids can go to school and go to restaurants without relying on a vehicle. So it's really making sure that our urban residents have access to those urban amenities. On the ground right now, about 49% of households are within a half mile of one of those areas. And TRPC's forecast shows that by 2035, somewhere around 57% of households will be within a half mile of those areas. But again, that's well below the target that we set of 72%. So a couple of bullet points here just on why we aren't meeting our targets. And some of it has to do with the development that we've seen over the past 10 years. So the baseline for Sustainable Thurston targets is 2010. And again, the plan was completed in 2013. So a lot of the development that we've seen since the plan was completed hasn't necessarily been consistent with the Sustainable Thurston goals. So we've seen a lot more development in recent years in our downtown areas and along our corridors, but we've also seen a lot of development in our rural areas and in kind of the outskirts of the urban areas. So again, some of the development that we've seen hasn't always been consistent with that Sustainable Thurston vision. The cities have made a lot of promising changes to their development regulations to move more in alignment with Sustainable Thurston, but it does take time both to get those regulations implemented and to actually actualize the type of development that we want to see by those. ADUs is one example here. So I think all the cities have made efforts to make ADUs a little easier to permit and to build. That's great, and that'll help move us into our alignment with Sustainable Thurston's goals, but it's going to take some time for those actions to be implemented. And finally, TRPC's model shows that the changes that the cities have made recently will help get us closer to meeting our goals, but not all the way there. So it's been a step in the right direction, but it's not enough to get us fully to where Sustainable Thurston wants us to be. So with that in mind, as part of the buildable lands process, we wanted to identify some recommendations. So what are the strategies or what are the actions that we could actually do to get us closer to those goals? And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Allison to talk more about our work with our stakeholder committee and how we developed recommendations.
Thanks, Michael. So as you guys are aware, and have seen there and seen the past presentation, there's a lot of great data and work that went into developing the Buildable Lands report. You can go ahead to the next slide, Michael. What we wanted to do is for the recommendations that we have focused on that volume 2 analysis. As Michael highlighted, what we are seeing in our region is that we are meeting the requirements of the Growth Management Act when it comes to how we're concentrating growth in urban areas, but we're not necessarily meeting our own vision that was set through Sustainable Thurston. And part of the discussion that we wanted to have in the community is that vision still what we want to be striving for? Is it still a viable pathway for us? And if so, what will it take for us to get there, and what can we do? So the strategies that I'm going to walk through, which are summarized, I'll summarize the high level ones here, but there's more detail on them in the Buildable Lands report. There are recommendations for the cities and the county to consider in their next round of comp plan updates, but they're not requirements. They're not the reasonable measures we would have had if we weren't meeting the TMA goals. And Michael will talk about this a little bit more at the end, but what we're seeing generally is that there's a lot of things that we can do that will get us closer to those land use targets, but we're unlikely to meet them by the date that we had originally set for Sustainable Thurston by 2035. And so, but it might be worth looking at a longer time frame. So in order to develop the recommendations throughout the Buildable Lands process, we've worked with an advisory committee that's made up of city and county staff, representatives from across the community, development community, and environment community, realtors, different partners, tribes. All were able to provide input on the assumptions we used in the Buildable Lands report, and also they help guide these recommendations. Go ahead to the next slide. So in general, what we heard from that advisory committee is that the land use vision established in Sustainable Thurston is still one that folks want to see us pursuing as a region. So they recommend that we continue to work toward the Sustainable Thurston land use goals, but there is a recognition that for the market that we have, for the type of development we're seeing, it is going to take longer than 2035 to achieve those targets. So those targets were always set as a reach goal, that they would be challenging to reach. And what we heard from our advisory committee is that it's still something worth pursuing, but with a recognition that realistically, it will take us longer than 2035 to get there. We talked a lot about the mix of regulatory changes and market incentives that might see the type of growth that we need to see, and I think that balance is going to continue going forward. What we've generally seen is that many of the regulatory changes to create the type of dense urban growth on our corridors and our city centers, as Michael said, the cities have taken a lot of steps to make those regulatory changes. And what will really move the envelope probably going forward is having greater partnerships with the private market that brings people in to complete that vision. So, I think we didn't see a lot of recommendations from our advisory committee around a lot of new regulatory changes needed, but how do we get people to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. So looking for strategic opportunities and partnerships that will help achieve that in the future. And something in general that came up a lot with our advisory committee is that we have a need to articulate the trade-offs of the development decisions that we are making in our region. When development is permitted that doesn't meet the sustainable Thurston target, there might be a lot of good reasons for that, but it does create a deficit that overall we're creating in terms of sustainability. How is it maybe affecting housing affordability in the long term? How might it affect our ability to achieve our climate goals? How does it affect habitat? What's the effect on local agriculture, on public health, costs, and equity? And I think there was a recognition, you know, we had a lot of discussions with our stakeholders. Something that came up is that, you know, we see all these reasons in our vision why we want to encourage dense urban growth. And when those proposals come up again and again, we hear, and planners here and elected officials here, folks in the community who say, you know, this will change my neighborhood, this will change the character of what I'm used to. And it's hard not to be sympathetic to those arguments as well. But the trade-offs to seeing that kind of growth, the benefits that we've articulated in the vision, having a way to gauge those as those developments come forward, I think is a conversation that we want to continue to have. How do we articulate those trade-offs? Go ahead to the next slide. So those are the general recommendations, kind of overarching. But I'll dive into some of the specific ones for different areas. What we saw in the Buildable Lands report is that, again, urban centers and corridors will continue to be really important to achieving that vision, right? We have that target to concentrate 72% of our urban growth in city centers and along corridors and in neighborhood centers. And what we're seeing is an increase certainly in the density and development in our city centers, but we're seeing less of that happening on the corridors. The type of development happening on the corridors, even though we have a lot of the land use, the zoning codes and things that are there, permit mixed use development, but we're not really seeing a lot of that development. So the recommendations are to continue the type of increases we're seeing in city centers, the type of tools that seem to be working there, and to see how we can apply some of those lessons to our mixed use zones along corridors. And that might involve identifying opportunity sites that are located along the corridors and seeing if there are incentives to support more redevelopment along those corridors. We have a project regionally we're working on for the Martin Way corridor right now, and that's certainly something we're looking at for Martin Way. There's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment along Martin Way. We are not currently, even though we have mixed use zoning there, we're not seeing a lot of that type of development coming in there. And so part of that is looking at why and how might we achieve that. Next slide. We also talked a lot about neighborhood centers. And so this is part of the Sustainable Thurston vision. Neighborhood centers are not right along the city centers and corridors. They're areas in neighborhoods where you might have a neighborhood center zoning and just have a small shop. And in the Sustainable Thurston vision, it was envisioned that these neighborhood centers would be, you know, little neighborhood hubs for someone to go, do a small grocery shopping, get a few of their basic needs met. And what we see is that we have a lot of neighborhood centers in terms of areas that are zoned for small commercial use in those areas, but not many of them are really achieving the vision that's set out in Sustainable Thurston. So there's two ways sort of to make these neighborhood centers more functional. One is that we could have more housing concentrated around them. That would be one way to do it. And the other way to do it is that sometimes we have this commercial zoning, but the type of development that's in there, the type of businesses that are in there are not really the types of businesses where they're serving the surrounding neighborhoods. It might be something like a mini storage or something like that. It's not something where people are going to get their daily needs met. And so this is another instance where we need to do some partnership with the private market. If we want to maintain these neighborhood centers as part of our vision, we need to see them functioning in a different way. Go ahead to the next slide. throughout the rest of the urban areas and the urban growth areas, we have seen a change, and cities have been working on expanding options for middle density housing in low and medium density residential zones. And that's something we recommend continuing. That will help support those targets going forward. Something else to look at is around infrastructure. There are areas in our urban areas where a lack of infrastructure is posing a barrier to future development. And that sort of happens in two ways. On the one hand, we see areas, including in the urban core areas, where you may have a single property that would be a good area for redevelopment at higher density, but the cost of upgrading the infrastructure poses a barrier. So that's one thing to look at that kind of ties with looking for those opportunity sites where there might be options to help get over that barrier, see that type of development we want to see. On the other side, we have areas within our urban growth areas, particularly around the edges of those areas where we don't have, say, sewer or other urban services extended there. And so those areas are not likely to develop at higher intensity urban levels. And most of those areas are zoned pretty low density now, but something for the cities in the county to consider in the next round of comp plan updates is whether, so our assumption is that if it's in the urban growth area, it will become annexed, it will be provided with an urban level of service. And it may be worth revisiting these areas, which are highlighted in red, that orange red on the map here, and assessing whether there is really an intent, if it is really realistic to expect that with the type of environmental constraints that some of those areas have, that will be something that happens in the future. Next slide. In our South County cities, when we looked at the data, we really saw that for the most part, they are achieving the sustainable Thurston vision. We are seeing modest mixed-use growth, infill development in those areas. And so the recommendations we had is just to kind of keep on going in that direction. I think we've seen a lot of really interesting development coming in to our city centers in the South County, and continuing to work on those Main Street plans, and as those areas continue to grow. I think we do expect to see, as we get more pressure from cost and other things, people looking at the South County cities as an option if prices are continuing to rise in the North County cities. Next slide. And in our rural areas, we sort of looked at the balance between what types of development are happening in rural areas and in natural resource lands, including agriculture and forestry. And so the recommendations are to support strategies to preserve natural resource lands, particularly in agriculture and forestry, in ways that support existing natural resource uses. So I know that there's interest at the county in looking at some of the strategies around preserving agricultural lands. What are the ways? I think what we're seeing is that in the future, under current conditions, under the current rules we have now, we would continue to see some conversion of those natural resource lands. And so what strategies might there be to help preserve those areas if preserving the limited agricultural lands that we have now is a priority for us. We also talked a bit about commercial centers in the rural areas and how do we take that neighborhood center concept that we have for the urban areas. What does it really mean? There is neighborhood center zoning in the rural areas, and we do have some commercial zoning, but how does that really work? How does that really serve areas in the rural parts of the county? So that's another recommendation for folks to look at in the next round of comp plan updates. Next slide. And I am going to hand it back over to Michael at this point.
So with those recommendations in mind, we wanted to ask the question, how far would those recommendations, those strategies get us towards meeting the Sustainable Thurston targets by 2035? And we really relied on TRPC's land capacity model that we maintain as part of Buildable Lands to kind of answer that question. So we kind of grouped some of those strategies into these 4 different topic areas. So what if we saw more housing in general in our urban areas, if we saw a lot of that kind of middle density housing that a lot of the cities are working towards? What if we saw in our urban corridors, in our downtown areas, especially along our urban corridors. What if we saw a lot of the type of development that we're now starting to see in our downtown areas? If we saw more mixed use development and more redevelopment, how far would that get us towards our targets? What if all those areas that were zoned for neighborhood retail, what if they actually had the types of businesses that really served their nearby residents and were consistent with the sustainable Thurston vision? And what if we work to preserve all the existing farmland and timberland within the rural unincorporated county? Where would that get us? So we ran that through our model. And then when we go back and look at those original slides for our targets, you can see for that first target that at least 95% of new housing between 2010 and 2035 would be in our urban areas. Our baseline forecast shows that about 87% of growth would be within our urban areas, but with the strategies that we talked about, that could get us up to 94%. So within 1% of the target that was established under 2035. And then looking at that second sustainable Thurston target, that 72% of urban area growth would be within a half mile of an urban center, urban corridor, neighborhood center where people have access to goods and services. We see that under the baseline forecast, 57% of new housing, or excuse me, housing would be within a half mile of those areas. But with those strategies, that could get us up to 66%. So within 6% of the target that was established under Sustainable Thurston. So we might not be able to get to meet those targets by the original deadline, by the 2035 deadline, but I think the work that we've done shows that we can make substantial progress towards meeting those goals over the next 15 years. So we're now in the final stages of the Buildable Lands report. The next steps that are coming up over the next few weeks, Alice and I will be briefing the Board of County Commissioners on May 12th. The Buildable Lands report is a deliverable. The client, well, excuse me, TRPC is doing this on behalf of Thurston County, so that will deliver the report to them. We'll be bringing the report for your acceptance in the June TRPC Council meeting. And then, like I said, the report will be delivered to Thurston County after that in June. And then finally, the report is intended to inform the comprehensive plan updates due in 2025. And I think that's kind of the most important thing to highlight here, is that the Buildable Lands report tells us a lot about how we've been developing over the past 20 years or so, and what we expect to happen over the next 20 years if we do nothing. But it's up to the cities and the jurisdictions to really use that information to inform their comp plan updates to make that decision. Do we want to keep up with this business as usual trend, or are there steps that we can take, actions that we can take to change that trajectory? So once the report is complete, it's handed off to the cities in the county to inform those comp plan updates. So I have contact information for Allison and myself and a link to the project website, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that have come up. I'll stop sharing my screen, but I can go back to slides if needed.
Michael, can you see the faces and call on people?
I'll defer to you, JW, if you want to call on people.
Okay, very good. Chris Stearns, then Commissioner Edwards.
I think you're
muted,
Chris.
Did you want me to jump in there?
Yeah,
or what?
Yeah, Chris is deferring to you, Commissioners. Go ahead and start, Gary.
Oh, okay. Only because I hit the mute button quicker. Hey, my question is, are we considering the urban flight and the new work from home process and how that is going to affect everything, it seems to me? Are we kind of calculating that in, or thinking that's going to be a phenomena that goes away, or do we have are we watching office spaces in the urban centers and such? So just curious, where are we at?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we considered as part of to a small extent, as part of Buildable Lands. It's kind of an area of uncertainty, honestly, that we have recognized. A lot of the work that was done for Buildable Lands and for the population employment forecast that the report is based off of was completed in the 2017, 2018. So before the kind of current COVID-19 pandemic and before a lot of the current trends that we've been seeing towards telework. So we recognize that that's an area of uncertainty, and that if there is a big shift in where people choose to live, that could affect some of the findings of the Buildable Lands report. Alice and I, we've been doing a lot of outreach as part of this project, and we've done some meeting with some real estate groups. And it's been really interesting to hear from them because they're seeing kind of two things happening at the same time. They're seeing a lot of clients from out of county, mostly from the Seattle metro area, that are looking for housing in Thurston County, both the urban areas and the rural areas. And they're also seeing a lot of clients, Thurston County residents, that are looking for housing, larger homes outside of the urban areas within Thurston County. So we're going to have to continue to track those trends to see how they play out.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll go with Chris, then Debbie, then Cynthia, please.
Thank you, JW. The three things I wanted to point out are just that rural school districts, ones that are not based around a town or city, in our county still can't find water rights in order to build new schools. This has to be dealt with. I mean, this is a statewide problem, but it's especially severe in our county because of the rapid growth we've experienced in the past several years, several decades. The state has also, this legislative session, increased restrictions on Group B systems. For those of you who don't know what Group B means, it's less than 15 connections. Covington for Lacey, you guys supply water to one of our systems near Lacey. That's a Group B system. And they're requiring more increased water testing, I guess, as part of the thing, although generally counties do the regulation on Group Bs. And finally, I'll just sum this up with the fact that the counties that didn't do growth management, like Cowlitz and Skamania, have unlimited growth in rural areas, and they're suffering the consequences of that. What that means is when they've developed forest lands, they're now asking for senior services out dirt roads in extremely rural areas far away from the urban centers. And those services, like getting seniors to their facilities or getting the services they need, cost them a lot more. So there are consequences to rural development that's not properly planned out. Thank you.
Debbie?
So one of the questions I had was probably along this line of things that we've seen kind of break during the pandemic, and the affordability of homes, because right now I think I counted last night, there was probably 20 homes for sale in the city of Tumwater, which is unbelievable. And they're astronomically expensive. And so I know we're building, we have the preserve that's building, but I just, I don't know how we're going to keep up as a community and as in a city to try to keep up with the demand for housing. And I'm also curious to where those individuals who are moving to this area, because I've heard up from California, down from Seattle, which is then going to cause even more pressure on the more rural areas, smaller towns, Rainier, Tenino, Yelm, and then even getting into outside of, our citizens moving outside of the county. So is that something that we're tracking in all of this, or do you think it has an influence?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges of buildable lands, because kind of our mandate under the legislation is just to assess if there's enough developable land for the housing that's projected, but not really to look into the affordability side of that. And that's a real challenge that our stakeholder committee, and a topic that obviously came up a lot. As part of this buildable lands report update, we've been really fortunate that we've been doing at the same time that we've been doing the housing action plan. So that is a project where the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater received some funding from the Department of Commerce and partnered with TRPC to really look at some actions that could address the housing affordability side of the equation. So we've been really lucky that we've been able to do buildable lands at the same time that we did that housing action plan, so that we had kind of an outlet to convene a group of people to talk about what we can do to address affordability.
I'll jump in. Pardon me for jumping ahead of the other hand, but to tag on to that, also the Regional Housing Council is looking at opportunities to pool the money to build more, support more affordable housing so that we get entry-level housing and then make more of the stock available for others. So lots of people working on that. And I have Cynthia, then Clark, then Hillary.
So I'm just asking a clarification question. You had a map about lack of sewers, one of which was around the Yelm Highway. And I was wondering if that map was put together before the, and if it's in the area where we're now annexing and putting in the sewer system around the golf course. And I just wondered if that map was that area or that whether it has changed. Yes, that is that that's not the golf course area, I take it.
That's correct. This is the area kind of in the southeast part of Lacey.
Okay.
I believe it's in the MGSA zoning district.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, when we begin the forecast update, we talk to city staff to get their thoughts on some areas where infrastructure, particularly sewer, would be a barrier to achieving those urban densities.
Okay, because we just managed to start that project fairly soon, and I wasn't sure if this was before that or after. Thank you.
Yep, this would have been before that.
Clark?
Thank you, JW. So I've been wrestling with trying to put together in my head the regional climate plan, the housing action plan, the buildable land survey, and now the second chapter, the buildable land survey, and trying to reconcile these efforts with some little bits, like in the housing action plan, where we said that affordable housing was unlikely to be built on the private market. And as Michael just said, the GMA, that first chapter of the buildable lands doesn't weigh in on affordability or who lives or whether folks are displaced. It's agnostic about it. It predicts likely growth, but it's agnostic about who might live there. And I'm thinking about my sort of anecdotal experience of as apartments are going up along Britton Parkway and out towards the top of the Nisqually Hill on Martin Way, that people who used to live close to downtown Olympia who are doing service jobs are moving out there. And I'm wondering if that just completely blunts this vision of dense urban half-mile walkable, because you've got new residents coming in to enjoy the boutique shops downtown and have a walkable life. And you have the people serving those folks who are commuting in and making their drive to Fred Meyer. And so is there any net gain climate-wise, because there's certainly not community building-wise, to court retirees or wealthy folks to come in and live downtown if it's a matter of displacement. So I'm thinking that as we move into next year's work plan, we want to consider the sum of these documents that we've had over the last couple of years and reconsider whether we're focused on community development that looks at the people and building resilience for our community and interdependence, or whether we want to continue to focus on economic development that prioritizes increasing the value of land and building wealth. I think we're at a moment to reconsider that. So thanks for listening.
And I can chime in a little bit on the climate side too, because one of the components of the climate action plan was that to achieve our climate goals, we need to achieve our sustainable thirsting goals. So the two of those are directly linked to each other.
Hillary, then Zita.
Thanks, JW. And thank you, Allison and Michael, for part two. I enjoyed part one, so I was looking forward to part two. I want to just say a couple of things, kind of dovetailing into what Clark said. I appreciate you speaking directly to this conflict between moving more dense housing into our established neighborhoods and residents' feelings about that across the map. I mean, most of what I am hearing is not changing the character of the neighborhood, which is not a particularly great way of saying we don't want people who are different from us moving into our neighborhood, but I also share Councilmember Gilman's concern about diverse housing. We do have segregation in our community in Olympia. We have a much higher poverty rate on one side of town. We have a much more racially and ethnic diverse community on one side of town. And the natural demarcation for that is downtown for us. And so as a school district, we think about that all the time. What kinds of communities are we building? And I'm sure that the other school districts can weigh in on this as well. So I appreciate you speaking directly to that. I did have just a couple of questions. On slide number 12, there were some blue circles around the neighborhood centers, and I wasn't sure what those meant.
See if I can pull that up here. So the blue circles, hold on a second here. So on this map, every kind of orange star, those are areas where there's a kind of neighborhood retail zoning or commercial center zoning, one of those neighborhood retail type zones. Sustainable Thurston, the language behind that second land use target is that people should live within a half mile of a neighborhood center where they have access to goods and services. And what we found in this project is that when you look at the businesses that are in a lot of those neighborhood centers, they don't necessarily, they're not something that people who live within a half mile would walk to, particularly on a daily basis. So they might be like a gas station with a convenience store or a mini storage unit. So they're serving the community, but they're not really consistent with that Sustainable Thurston vision as a type of business that you might walk to get, a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk, a cup of coffee, or something like that.
Right.
So
are
the ones with the blue circles, yes, are the ones that we think, TRPC staff think, are kind of consistent with that vision.
Okay, that was what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding that correctly. So I think that's great that we have identified some neighborhood centers that are meeting those needs, and hopefully that's like an area for future collaboration, as you say, in partnering with the private sector. The other question I had was the map that showed where where the corridors in downtown were. The question I had about this was that if we see large development happening within Olympia, for example, but outside of those particular orange shaded areas, would that development qualify or help us move the needle? And I'm asking this for a very particular reason, and I suspect that many of the school districts are seeing this too, is that we know that there is a proposal for a very large development of single family homes along Cooper Point. That's not in this orange area, right? And so as a school district, we have to we're thinking about how are we going to get those kids to their daily commute. And if it's outside of that growth area, how does that impact sort of how we're participating and contributing to meeting the Sustainable Thurston goals? So I guess that's my question is, what if it's close to there, but not in that little orange spot?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So Sustainable Thurston, as we've talked about, has these two goals, and they both support each other, but they also they push-pull against each other. So one of them is just concentrating growth in the urban areas generally. So we do want to see more growth under those targets in urban areas generally, but we want to see the most growth along these corridors. And sometimes those things can push and pull against each other. We saw that a bit in the data. If we're seeing more middle density housing, if most of our growth is concentrated into that type of growth, that might mean we see that target working and this target around concentrating along corridors and centers not working as well. The centers and corridors are really focused on where would we have high capacity transit. So in the long term, where are we? It's tied to where are we going to be able to allow people to get around town without relying on driving alone. So that's part of it. And how can we provide the most efficient level of services, but also have the type of density that's going to support transit. So that would be the concern of having high densities occurring on places that are outside corridors. One of the recommendations that I didn't highlight here, though, for us to think about long-term, we've had sort of our main corridor set for a long time, but we're really growing as a region. And at some point we might want to go back and say, well, are these our corridors? Are they locked forever in time? I think Meridian Road comes up as another, the area going out to Hawks Prairie. 510 connecting to Yelm. Are there other, we started looking at rural corridors and things like that. There are other ways that our community is connected beyond these sort of historic boundaries. And so maybe there are other areas where we still want the goal of concentrating along corridors. Do we have all our corridors? Do we have our neighborhood centers in the right places to meet the growth we're going to see?
I'm going to ask Zita to make a comment or ask one quick question, and then we're going to have to move on to stay on with our agenda.
Well, I want to thank you, Michael and Allison, for a great presentation. It's important to strategize ways to get closer to sustainable Thurston goals, to keep Thurston County a great place to live and work into the future. I wanted to take a look at slide 5, if we could, real quick. I had a question. I think it was slide 5. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the one that has the new housing in urban areas. It was a map. I'm sorry, I got the wrong one.
Not sure I remember which one that was. Apologies.
It was showing new housing in urban areas, and I was wondering if that included UGAs or if that was not including UGAs. I think it was not including.
Yeah, I'm not sure which slide it was, but when we talk about urban areas, we're talking about both the cities and the unincorporated UGAs.
Oh, okay, so it is including UGAs. There was one of your slides about showing opportunities for new housing, had color all around, and there was a big white spot at the marine terminal. And I thought, wow, marine terminal could be an opportunity for housing. But Clark and Hillary's comments are really appropriate, that if we have, we need more affordable housing, like multifamily housing. I'm sure that people on the TRPC Council remember Roger Millar's comments to us, the ED of WashDOT. He told us that it was important to have dense urban development in the urban corridors to provide affordable housing close to where people work. And one of the big benefits that can bring to the Olympia area is it'll bring us rapid transit quicker. You remember DuPont is scheduled to get light rail around 2035 and Olympia after that. And the more we do dense urban development in the urban corridors, the quicker we're going to get that rapid transit down here. Things like the preserve out in Tumwater, that is sprawl. That's out in the country. That's past where I live, and I got a farm. So I appreciate your strategizing how to meet the sustainable Thurston goals. Very important.
All right, thank you all. This will come back before you next month for an action to adopt that. And I'm sure if you have more questions between now and then, Michael and Allison would be happy to host them. And thanks to you too, Michael and Allison, for coming out to Yelm to talk to our planning commission and keeping us, we weren't on the map today, but I'll tell you that we are doing our best to comply with those growth management goals. And as soon as they give us our water and a place for our gophers to live, we will build like you can't believe. We're going to move on now. We just a tiny bit behind schedule, but I know we can make it up. And we will have Vina talk to us about our ethics and non-discrimination policies.
Great. Good morning. I'm Vina Tabbitt, the Deputy Director here at TRPC, and TRPC has had an ethics policy in place for quite a while, but you all haven't seen it unless you've gone through your new member orientation for about 3 years, and we've made some slight updates, mainly to the non-discrimination section of the ethics policy. I'm hoping you've all had a chance to read it, and I would encourage you to, especially since this will be a tiny bit abbreviated. But really, we have the ethics policy in place for staff as well as our councils and boards, the policy board and any of our committees. And it's really in place so that our actions don't result in in or create an appearance of some sort of ethic violation. And so there's a bulleted list of here of what that might be, basically using our role as a public entity for private gain or being impartial in our decision making. So I am going to just zip through this. Oh, and then we also did some housekeeping just to make this gender neutral. Our gifts and favors, and this is while you're acting as part of TRPC. We've just put some parameters around the gifts, basically trying to not take unsolicited gifts that are over $50. So, but you can take, like if someone invites you as part of TRPC and gives you food at a conference or something like that, you're able to accept that. Or our agency sometimes receives holiday food from our landlord. That's okay as long as it's very small amount. TRPC employees, we're not allowed to take outside employment if it's incompatible. So in other words, I wouldn't be able to take the type of employment I do at TRPC for an outside entity. If it was something like coaching a basketball team, that would certainly be approved. Another area just to talk to you all about is confidential information. Sometimes you go into executive session and we ask that you keep that information confidential when you come out of executive session, unless it's something that the chair and the group has agreed that you can share. And so that would be like coming out and what you share about Mark's annual evaluation, for instance. We cannot contract with, so if a member of our staff or one of you had a business, let's say one of you had a business collecting traffic counts, we would not be able to contract with you to collect traffic counts because you are one of our board members. We also have something in here for if staff, if you leave us or if one of the employees who's division director or higher leaves TRPC and joins a private firm, then the agency can't enter into contract with that private firm of a period of 12 months. And that's to make sure that they're not taking inside information and then bidding on a project and kind of furthering their career. And then the area that we did update is our non-discrimination clause. We just added more detail into some of the additional categories that there's federal laws around, and just enhanced it a little bit. And there were the comparable updates made to our non-discrimination policy, and it also now syncs up with our personnel policy. There was one other area. Employees are prohibited from any political action while an employee, but there's one area I wanted to talk to you about on conflict of interest. You all make decisions on how to award funding, and that's one of your roles for transportation funding. And it often comes up of, do we have a conflict of interest when we're making a decision to award funding to our jurisdiction? But as a representative of your public agency and as part of a metropolitan planning organization making those decisions of funding, it is inherent in your role as a member of our board that you make those decisions. Therefore, you cannot have a conflict of interest, and it's all for the public good. So that's one area I just wanted to clarify. This is all about private gain, not about making decisions for the public good. So with that, I am going to ask you if you have any questions. As I mentioned, there's comparable changes to our non-discrimination policy, and that's the other policy that we're having you look at. And then we're going to ask that you take action on adopting these changes at your next meeting.
I see Dennis has a question for you.
Vina, under item number 11, non-discrimination. If you
Yes.
could bring that back up.
Okay.
I'm questioning whether the red line went a little too far, and shouldn't the word or still be there? to make that sentence more complete?
Oh, yes, you're correct. I'll make that small amendment before you adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good catch.
Very crafty eye. Yes.
I actually do read this stuff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Nicely done. Good presentation. It's there for you to read and make any other recommendations, and then we'll see it again in June. Oh, yes, and Azita has a thumb up, not a hand up, a thumb up.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Thanks, Bina, for getting us back on schedule, too. That was awesome. So we are now at reports from outside committees. I don't see Doug here today, so we'll turn to Cynthia.
The Growth Management Policy Board for Puget Sound Regional Council met yesterday, and we covered a number of items, obviously, but the one I want to, including the school siting briefing paper, but nothing was really specific about it at the time. It was, a number of things were talked about depending on rural and urban types of sightings. But the one I wanted to talk about is the regional housing strategy, tools and actions. And they covered 3 types of things: supply, stability, and subsidy. And I thought that was, they kind of broke that down. And one of the things they mentioned as subsidy is exploring a 1% fee on single family families over 600,000 housing. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. Don't know if it would work here, but and then they are asking for a survey kind of thing to provide feedback. But the biggest thing when we were talking about it, they too were saying there needs to be a subsidy for working households because they can't afford when they're low income for long-term sources. The housing is just too expensive for them, and that's why they need to come up with some ideas of how to deal with that. And they also talked about land trust instead of just farms and urban areas for the, for transferred development rights, talking about preservation of historical buildings and actually urban kinds of protection for transfer of development rights, which is an interesting way to look at it rather than just our urban protections. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Well then,
you just muted yourself. There you go.
Everybody stretch, rub your eyes, get a cup of coffee. Mark's going to do his executive director's report now.
Now that is a rough introduction. I do have a few things I want to cover, and we're going to sneak in a little bit of a close up of the legislative session as well. Karen is, but a couple of things I wanted to mention first. Just this morning, I signed the contract with the facilitator for our retreat. So Amy Leneker will be our retreat facilitator, and really excited about that. Thank you to the committee. We've got the largest committee I've had since I've been here helping us with the retreat, which is really great to see. We're going to be sending out a doodle poll shortly, because one of the things that we've been talking about is it's likely that we're going to hold this retreat remotely. Our facilitator has strongly urged us not to look at a hybrid approach. And so we're likely planning on remote. With that, she's also encouraged us to look at this as 2 half days rather than having everyone try and participate on Zoom for a full day. And so we're assuming that one of those half days will be July 9th, which is already the scheduled date, would have been the scheduled date of our council meeting. And the doodle poll will be looking for another 4-hour chunk of time for folks around that time for the retreat. So look for that coming from Berlina in the not too distant future. We right now are working on a proposal for a Rebuilding America's Infrastructure grant, a RAISE grant, to fund a freight strategy for the region. This has been an unfunded need for quite some time in our transportation planning document. And we are hoping that we can take advantage of the RAISE program to get that funded. And I've reached out to a number of jurisdictions already for support on that. We're considered a rural area, and so that grant does not require a match from us. So this is a really good opportunity for our region to get a freight strategy in place, especially as the federal government is looking more to infrastructure, and hopefully the funding will follow in the not too distant future. So I may be reaching out to more of you as we put together this application to get letters of support for that effort. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, since water has been a priority for the council for past 4 years, at the federal level, the Senate passed a water infrastructure bill last week, authorizing $35 billion in funding. A lot of that is for the state revolving fund, which is key for water purveyors to provide for that infrastructure, low to no interest loans to do some of the work that's necessary. Authorization does not guarantee funding, only appropriation does, but still it's a really good first step at the federal level that potentially we're going to get some more focus on water infrastructure in the future as well. So that's it for my updates. I do want to turn it over to Karen Parkhurst really quickly. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk a little bit about, Vina, could you allow me to either share my screen, or if you've got Karen's presentation, because it's not allowing me. I must not have come in the right way. You've done it now? Okay.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Thank you. Okay. Karen, are you ready? Karen, we're not hearing you if you are ready.
Now are you hearing me?
Now we're hearing you.
Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit, and I'm trying to keep this really short, about the 2022. Oh, this is the end of my slide presentation.
Nope.
Okay, never mind.
Well, okay. Oh, yes, it was. They look the same, the start and the finish. All right, yes. Here we go.
So we're going to talk about the 2021 session. I'm just going to go through just a quick reminder of what we were looking at. We were looking at I-5, the rural Thurston County main streets, public transportation, multimodal system, preserve and maintain. Next slide. Childcare, early learning, broadband, mental health, transition services, housing and homeless, funds to improve energy efficiency, camping on state lands. Next. And the local government level, looking at keeping our shared revenue going, talking about removing barriers to implementing our local climate mitigation plans, and investing in mitigation lands for gophers. So here's just a few numbers, because I think it's fascinating. The legislature adjourned on time. They passed 340 bills. The governor signed about 192. That could have changed between yesterday and today. The remote session worked in some interesting ways. It worked for us to be able to talk to our legislators. And this data came to me from a state legislator last week. The 2020 session, we had 18,700 people signing on to testify. In 2021, because it was remote, 67,700 people signed in to testify. So clearly it was more accessible. People didn't have to take a day off, get childcare, drive here, figure out how to maneuver once they got here. So they were much interested. The other piece that I heard from Senator Saldana was she had more youth contacting her, and they were digging a little deeper. They weren't just saying, take away this amendment. They were saying, let's look at the underlying bill. And so there were a lot of interesting coalitions that were formed as well. So for state employees, we went from 6% to about 80 or 90% telework. And the House and Senate will continue to let employees telework during the interim. We know that this will have impacts on our city revenues and our county revenues, but we're continuing to do that. We learned that although, once again, I believe Representative Marcus and others helped us keep some funding for the Nisqually Bridge work, the $5 million, but they were really serious about saying, unless we're going to have a new revenue package, we're not going to put a bunch more projects in. So it's kind of a miracle that we have $5 million in there, but they were really careful. We have too many priority issues and we need to focus them down a little more tightly for the 22 session. As I went over them this morning, it was like, that's really hard in the 10 minutes you have to talk about things with our legislators. So we're really going to need to focus. Huge, big legislation passed. And there's an error in this slide. It should be tax increment financing, capital gains tax, change in vehicles by 2030, climate and environmental, mental health, transition support. So I want to mention one of the things that really I noticed was that our legislature was coming at things from a variety of viewpoints. So when we were talking about affordable housing and homelessness and renter protections and the like, we were also talking about landlords. So there seemed to be a really holistic view of these are big, gnarly programs and problems that we have in our community, and we need to be working together to figure this out. Mental health, in addition to focusing on schools and the like, there's also, what if we made it available so that people that are moving into the mental health profession can not have to do their some of their work in person, but they could do it online so they can be certified sooner. So I think it will be really important as we prepare for the 2022 session to watch implementation of those big things and identify unintentional barriers and ask for change. So even if we're not going to implement tax increment financing at local levels, I think it will be really important for each of us in our jurisdictions and for the regional council to say, is there anything that would prohibit us from doing this? One of the questions I don't like to answer when I go talk to legislators is, well, we gave you all these tools and you didn't use them. And so let's at least react and figure out how, if there's anything that gets in the way of using them. Next slide. Again, I talked about environment. I talked about that. Childcare, early learning. There was a lot of focus on childcare, the level of eligibility, reducing some of the costs. Equity was everywhere. It was in schools, medicine, wages, housing, cannabis. Apparently, we're not necessarily treating cannabis businesses with equity. And so lots of things. Next page. Broadband, I think that the big pieces were the use of highway right-of-way. So DOT would provide that right-of-way to lay some of that infrastructure. Also broadens providers, and it requires sellers in a residential community when you sell your house to say if you have broadband access and at what level. Economic development. Michael keyed me into what a big deal this is, this focus on manufacturing. There were several bills that dealt with that. So one hopes that will help us in our community to build up that manufacturing base. Again, tax increment financing, capital gains tax. Next slide. And in the climate and energy piece, some big legislation, clean fuels, customer support services like helping with green roofs and trees, forest management. So we're looking at that carbon sequestration, and is there ways that we can, especially around fires, how do we manage our forests to both support carbon sequestration and try and deal with wildfire kinds of issues? Cap and invest, ride sharing and commute trip reduction, kind of broadening, actually saying rather than needing 5 people in the van, you can start with 3. in electric vehicle, lots of effort, infrastructure, tax incentives, mapping, forecasting, ferries. So lots of talk about the electric vehicle infrastructure. Just a few more for you guys. I know some of our rural communities have talked about forming parks and recreation districts, and there were some changes to that. Thurston County got an additional Superior Court position, which is a big ask for quite a while. And they've created an Office of Cybersecurity within state government. We are certainly hearing, as we have more working from home, some concerns about RIS folks about cybersecurity. Next slide. Also, a couple of policies and goals that I think are important to deal with. This is doubling the state's manufacturing employment base, preserving affordable energy services, and then requiring state transportation to focus on preservation and safety as a priority. Next slide. And then finally, you know, January 22nd, 2022, it's only a few months till the next session. And we don't know if it will be in person, remote, or hybrid, but I think there's going to be some interesting conversations about that. I think there will be no question that we have opened the door to remote testimony. And then if we have all heard about special sessions between now and then, if they decide that they would like to tackle the transportation revenue piece, which is a big lift, then there would be a reason to come into special session. Also, there may be some state decisions to be made about any infrastructure funding that happens at the federal level. So that's my quick presentation. I will be sending out my usual tracker that's updated. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Ooh, and now Karen can breathe.
Did I do okay? Did I keep it in the right time?
You did. We still have time for member sharing.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so what another full packed meeting. We do have time for member sharing. If anybody has something from their organization or jurisdiction they'd like to share with the group, now would be the time to do it. Clark?
Thank you, JW. I just want to tag on briefly to Karen's report that I had brought up before, the idea of a Thurston County broadband access team, and House Bill 1336, which is on the governor's desk now, will allow ports to get into the retail business of telecommunications and internet, and allows cities and PUDs and counties to partner with them. So that's a huge step that makes it, I think, more relevant and more important that we consider setting up a broadband access team.
Great. We will go in order of Mel, Chris, and Cheryl, please.
Okay, I just want to give an update on the state of Tumwater schools and COVID. So last Monday, May 3rd, we had about 3/4 of our students in class all day for 4 days a week. So that's great news. That's about 4,500 students. And we track students who are test positive and those who are quarantined. So out of those 4,500 students, 7 have tested positive and 101 are in quarantine for close contact. And what that means for those 101 students is that they have a member of their household who tested positive, who are in like a 10 to 14 day quarantine depending. But then the student's quarantine doesn't start until after the positive person's ends. So these 101 students could be out of school for 28 days. So that's a month's worth of school they're going to miss because a member of the household tested positive. Also, they're allowed to sit within 3 feet of each other in the classroom, but when they eat lunch, they have to be 6 feet apart. So we have twice as many kids in the school, but we have to find twice as much room for them to eat lunch. And so that's been a challenge. The other challenge is the amount of people dropping their kids off via car versus riding the bus. The buses are still very empty, and the lines to drop kids off in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon are very long. Good news on a totally different note is the Tumwater Farmers Market has changed their time, their day, and their location. They're now Sundays at Peter G. Schmidt Elementary, right off Capitol Boulevard. Please visit them, and they are there's a great synergy between the food bank's garden program, our fresh program, which grows food, the farmers market. So kudos to everybody who's helping with that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mel. Chris?
The Thurston PUD is going ahead with a study right this month on rural service, broadband and fiber optic. We're targeting school districts that don't have access at the moment. Our intention is not to compete with private facilities, but to provide service where there is none. And I just want to remind people, since growth was so much on the subject today of our work today, that with the redistricting taking place at the federal level, we didn't gain a congressman. I think Oregon did, so did Montana. But what has happened is we are growing about 29% over the last 10 years. The national average is 16.6. And as you all know, when this state grows rapidly, the need for the capital to grow falls consistent with that. So growth is going to come whether we like it or not. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl?
So mark your calendars for June 1st. It is the opening of the library, the West Olympia Timberland Library at Capitol Mall. Thank you, Clark, and thank you to the City of Olympia, who is also helping Timberland Regional Library out in terms of the lease. This is a 2-year lease, what we call a demonstration library. And as Mike Reed says, you know, this is part of the post-pandemic economic recovery plan that is very equitable, reaching underserved communities. We're very excited. June 1.
Thanks, Cheryl. Commissioner Edwards.
I just wanted to follow up real quick on Clark's comments on that infrastructure issue. I guess you guys are all aware that the tribe is involved in getting something, Nisqually tribe getting something kicked off and going, right?
Maybe not, Gary. What is?
Okay. Well, on that topic that Clark brought up, the tribe is actually pushing forward on quite an infrastructure adjustment, in which broadband and everything would be pretty well supplied to rural America and probably other areas. So just worth maybe letting you folks know that. That's all.
Thank you.
Could I do a quick follow up on that, JW?
Yeah.
I just also wanted to mention that the county, Jenica Machado, has convened a broadband work group, and we've met once, and we're planning to meet ongoing, and it includes the Nisqually Indian tribe and the EDC, all the jurisdictions. So we've got the start going for the kind of coordination, Councilmember Gilman, that you talked about. And thanks to the county for leadership on that.
Very good. Carolyn, then Helen.
Okay. This is reporting out from the May 5th Transit Authority meeting. We learned that the Transportation Security Administration is extending the federal requirement that masks be worn on buses from the original stop date of May 11th. It's going to be extended out through mid-September. So, and of course, Intercity Transit follows those guidelines. We're going to be opening the Transit Center 2 facility, the new building, at the Olympia Transit Center on June 1st. And this will give public access to the customer service as well as public bathrooms, which is, I'm sure, going to be popular. And then just a quick update on legislature. We did fairly well on our funding requests. We got 150,000 of the 750,000 that we had requested for continuing Dash bus service in downtown Olympia. $750,000 represents about half of the biennial operating budget. We're going to get $2,275,000 toward replacing 18 dial-a-lift vehicles. So a lot of this we saw coming through this body. We got 4 regional mobility grants, and I won't go into the details for time-saving purposes, but it really is nice to see what starts with the Transportation Policy Board, moves through us and goes up through the state, actually come to fruition for intercity transit, which is great. And I don't know about the rest of you, but the February 2021 sales tax proceeds, which was reported out the end of April, was 17.7% higher than the February 2020 sales tax, which is pretty amazing, I think, considering. And then finally, our general manager, Ann Freeman Manzanares, just wants to extend to everybody to get outdoors and enjoy what remains of our bicycle commuter challenge. Thank you.
Very good. Helen, then Hillary, then Debbie, please.
Thanks. I just want to let everybody know that the Conservation District has decided to constitute its Citizens Advisory Committee. So we're looking for members. It would be for quarterly meetings. And we are really looking to expand both our outreach, but also the kind of input we get. And so land users, people with an interest in conservation of any kind, and people who are just able to give us some input on how we could make more of opportunities to leverage the kind of stuff we have to support people throughout the county. So we're looking for young people, just all kinds of people to come on to this and help us do a better job. And if you know anybody like that, they could contact Sarah Moorhead for an application. Thanks.
Hillary?
Yeah, thank you. Just dovetailing into a little bit of what Mel shared. In addition to lots of folks driving their kids individually to school, we're really working hard to encourage children to walk and bike to school. And in keeping with that, the Walk and Roll program on a Healthy Kids Safe Streets collaborative has a sign campaign to encourage everybody who's driving to remember that children are back on our roads on a daily basis. So you can pick up signs. I have like a little list here I'll read. You can pick up signs over the next 2 weeks at Jefferson Middle School on May 11th, Garfield Elementary School on May 13th, Reeves Middle School on May 18th, and Roosevelt Elementary School on May 19th. And our school board will welcome a representative to present about that effort next week at our board meeting. I encourage you to think about hosting a sign and reminding your neighbors to make room for kids and their awesome multimodal transportation.
Debbie?
So I wanted to mention that City of Tumwater is working with the Port of Olympia for the Oya Hotel transferring into senior housing. So there's been a lot of partnership and working with transforming that hotel, which is Suite Hotel, which is easier to transform into housing. So we're working with the port because the port is working on doing the FAA changes to allow housing on port property. So hopefully we'll be able to be successful with that. And that would be through the Housing Authority of Thurston County. So we're hoping that that will bring more housing to seniors in our community.
Very good. Anybody else want to share from their area? Okay.
JW, you got muted.
Well, and I just said the most important thing that I'd said all meeting, and I forgot. Looks like we got through another really good meeting. Lots of great information. I look forward to seeing you all next meeting. And remember that someone is sitting in the shade today because someone else planted a tree a long time ago. So thank you for your work in planning our future selves, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you, staff. Next month, rather.